Hi guys, I want to talk a little bit about something which has been on my mind for a while now. Now, this Sunday just gone by, I tuned into the Prog Corner doing their Sunday live stream, and they were talking all about their desert island discs. Now, I missed the definition of what is considered by them to be a desert island disc, so I will just have to give you my own personal definition of such. For me, a desert island disc is an album that you love wholeheartedly, but is not necessarily one of your favourites of all time. Otherwise, why not just do a favourite albums of all time video, you know? To me, a desert island disc is a comfort album, an album which gives you a connection to something, and in whatever fashion, it's very meaningful to you. You know, it's something that you can either rely on to bring you out of a funk, it's something that's had a particular point in your life where it's really had a very big impact on you. So, with that being said, I just want to go over some slightly maybe notable examples of ones that didn't quite make the cut, but are nonetheless very, very close to having been on the list, because I'm doing 10 records. I could do more, but I kind of want to give myself a cutoff point of 10, and I didn't want to limit myself to 5, you know. So these are the ones that didn't quite make the cut. We've got The Similitude of a Dream by the Neil Morse Band. Incredible record, absolutely love it, but maybe a little bit too dense to be a comfort album. I don't know, maybe. But regardless of anything, it's an incredible record, and if you've not had the pleasure of it, then absolutely check this one out. Next up, Casualties of Cool did not make the list. Again, love it, but I have to be in a very specific mood for it. It's not a record for all seasons for me, as much as it is an incredible album. Not even Scenes from a Memory made the list. My goodness. Again, this is basically the album that got me into progressive metal, and it's not on my Desert Island discs. Madness. But, you know, there's got to be sacrifices. Similarly, Haken's Aquarius, not quite there. Still a wonderful record, obviously, and I remember the very first time I heard this back in 2010, I was blown away. It was one of the coolest things I'd ever listened to, but there are still some records that have, you know, a deeper meaning to me than even this. And lastly, probably the most notable absence of my Desert Island discs is my favourite album of all time, Colours by Between the Buried and Me, with Colours 2 behind me. No, I love Colours. Like, it is indisputably my favourite album of all time, but it's just not Desert Island discs material for me, you know? I don't really go to this for all seasons. So, with the notable absences out of the way, let's dive in and start talking about the first pick. Okay, first up, it's a soundtrack to a movie. One of two soundtracks to a movie, actually. It's the soundtrack to Disney's Mary Poppins. Now, I did do a video a while back of my favourite Disney songs of all time, and Circle of Life and The Lion King topped the list. But I think as an overall experience, Mary Poppins is absolutely unbeatable in terms of musical quality. And it's just the best Disney musical, hands down. Every single song hits, every single song is a banger, and every single song makes me feel like a kid again. You know, everything from obviously the big classics, you know, Spoonful of Sugar, Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, haha. Let's Go Fly a Kite, an incredible experience, and certainly if I'm all alone on a desert island and I need cheering up, then you know Mary Poppins is going to do it. Okay, now I confess I'm cheating slightly with this next entry because it's technically two albums that were technically released separate to each other, but it's my list. I can change and bend the rules as much as I want. Haha, screw you. It's both of the Bluey albums, both the original one and Dance Mode. A record so good, or records so good, we got them on CD as well, because, yeah. Speaking of albums that really just cheer you up, it's impossible to not love the Bluey albums. Geoff Bush is quite frankly a compositional genius, and the fact that he's been able to make soundtracks to what is basically a kids' show go off this hard really does speak of his genius in terms of being able to make something that really just sticks the landing. I mean, yes, on face value, it's a kids' show, blah, 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 I know, but honest to God, just try the soundtracks, please. I promise you, they go off harder than anyone has any right to do so, and you get to look at beautiful Chattermax here as well on the back cover, which is always fun, because he's here as well. Definitely the strangest track on the album, but I am not responsible for the loss of brain cells when listening to Chattermax, but, you know. Moving on, a slightly possible controversial choice, I know, but it is Tubular Bells 2 by Mike Oldfield. Now this one definitely gets my pick over the first album. Now, I know, sacrilege, blah, 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 blah. I don't care. I heard this album before I heard Tubular Bells 1. I was about 8 years old, maybe, I think. And Dad got this on CD, and I was hooked. From the very opening moments of Sentinel to the very closing moments, you know, I was hooked. I was absolutely obsessed with this record. I listened to it all day, every day, like pretty much for as long as I, for as long as I was a child. This was like on constant rotation. It was really hard to actually stop me from listening to this album. And it's basically hardwired inside my DNA, and I get so much nostalgia from any of the tracks on this because it just immediately transports me back to a time when things were a lot easier, a lot simpler, and I couldn't imagine being stranded on a desert island without this. Okay, these next few albums do have a bit of a trend. They're all basically things that my dad introduced me to when I was little, and I've never grown out of love of them. And again, it's comfort, it's reassurance, it's the reason why these albums would need to come with me on a desert island, you know. It's not about being the best albums, it's about being the albums that really speak to me the most and make the biggest impact on me. And to that end, Paul Simon's Graceland, which is an absolutely stonkingly brilliant album. If you've never listened to this one, you are in for such a treat. I imagine most of you will have heard of at least some of the songs on this. You know, Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes, You Can Call Me Al, you know, all that sort of stuff. It was one of the most incredibly ambitious ways of fusing African music with contemporary pop back in the 80s. And most people had never really heard these sort of sounds before, which made Graceland such a landmark record and why I consider it so exciting and such an interesting thing to listen to. But again, I have really, really strong memories of this album. So I just think the idea of not having this with me is just, again, just madness. I can't fathom the idea of not having Graceland with me at all times. One of my favourites ever. So if we want to talk about songwriting and talking about stories, then for me, it doesn't get any better than Spanish Train and Other Stories by Berg. Now, I know he gets a bit of a bad rep and everyone goes, Lady in Red. I'm like, oh, shut up, go away. Lady in Red, terrible, terrible. Listen to this instead. Whole album from start to finish, and try and tell me that Berg is not a genius songwriter with incredible gift for lyricism. He's just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. I always remember, like, when I was a little kid, I always used to find, which one was it? Oh God, where is it? The Painter. I always found that one really funny, because like, how ludicrous it is. It's just the story about this guy who gets mad about his wife and this painter who's cheating on him, and is. It's such a crazy album. I absolutely love it so much. The variety of stories that he tells on this are what makes this album so interesting. You've got the really depressing stuff, the really heartbreaking stuff, like Lonely Sky, just that will tear you to pieces. But then you've got the really hilarious bawdy stuff, like Patricia the Stripper, you know. It's a great album, and again, definitely part of my DNA, and I would never be seen dead without a copy of this. Compilation time, everybody. It's not Queen. It's not ABBA, I know. I was shocked as well that ABBA's Gold didn't make the cut, but hey ho. It is, in fact, the best of Steely Span. Yeah, I know. I don't talk a lot about Steely Span, I'll be honest with you. Mostly because I've never really deep-cutted much into them, like apart from albums like Commoner's Crown or whatever, which I really, really love. But we had this on cassette growing up, the best of Steely Span. It was this exact record, obviously, but on cassette, with all the particular tracks on here as well. And every single one of these tracks, I can hear the first half measure of it, and I'll be like, oh, I know what that is. And I just can't hate it for that. It's so wonderful. It just brings me back in time, you know? Everything on here is absolutely wonderful. But it's not normally my kind of jam. I don't really much dive into Steely Span that much. I respect them a lot as a band, but I've never really explored much outside of this Greatest Hits compilation. But because of how impactful this Greatest Hits was to me, it has to come with me on the desert island, you know? If I'm going to be surrounded by coconuts and palm trees, you're damn sure Steely Span's going to be right there with me. Right, I don't listen to a lot of movie soundtracks. Like, occasionally I'll listen to some, but like, not a great deal. But there is one big exception to this, and this is, for my money, one of the greatest movie soundtracks of all time. No, it's not Star Wars. It is, in fact, Gladiator. Hans Zimmer's finest work, for my money. I absolutely love this record. Again, had this on CD back in the day. Don't know where it's gone. Lost between house moves, no doubt. I don't know. But I recently got this gifted to me by my mum for Christmas last year, because obviously she understands that it's the greatest movie soundtrack of all time, and I am absolutely obsessed with it. But what I find really, really interesting about this, right, is if you look at the production credits here, produced by Hans Zimmer and Klaus Badelt. Now, when you listen to some of the tracks on this, you can feel where the Pirates of the Caribbean theme came from, which is obviously deeply involved both Hans Zimmer and Klaus Badelt, and it kind of feels like this was like the groundwork for that, but a lot more serious, a lot more dramatic, I suppose, in a way. But for me personally, I think this is the finest movie soundtrack ever made, and I don't think it'll ever be topped by anything, at least not anytime soon. And it's something I will always want to come back to if I just want to feel cool as hell listening to the huge climax of the third track of The Battle. Oh my god, it's so good, it's ridiculous. Okay, moving into something a tiny bit more contemporary, but not that much more contemporary, to be honest with you. It is Deadwing by Porcupine Tree. Yep, I had to choose at least one Porcupine Tree album, and I was dying between Fear of a Blank Planet and Deadwing, but ultimately I had to choose Deadwing because I feel that this is the album that got me into Porcupine Tree. This is where I started with the band, and I don't think I've ever really encountered anything of theirs which I've enjoyed quite so much as this one. It's dark, it's moody, it's emotional, it's beautiful. Oh my god. It's a record for all seasons. There is a little bit of everything and a little bit of something for all people on this. It's wonderful. You've got the dark, moody, gothic, arriving somewhere but not here. You've got the incredibly catchy likes of a Halo, which is brilliant. Or you've got the sort of grim and industrial Shallow, you know. It's such a class album. It's so, so good. And again, I had this one on CD for a very, very long time, but again, I think it did get lost when I moved away from university, because I remember I did buy it back when it first came out in 2005, because a friend recommended it to me, and he was like, hey, you'll love this. And I was like, oh my god, I do love this. But no, I'm just pleased as punch to have this on vinyl now, and it's got some extra tracks in it which I'd never actually heard before. You know, So-Called Friend and Half Light. I'd never actually heard those tracks before, so when I first put this on the turntable and I got to side D, I was like, hang on a minute. I don't know this music, what is this? I was like, oh, it's new music. Oh god, it slaps. Amazing, love it. But yeah, Deadwing has to come with me, absolutely. Right, now, let it never be said that I do not have a flair for the theatrical, the over-the-top, the bravado, blah, 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 blah. Now, there could be any number of reasons for this, but I like to think the chief reason for it is Bat Out of Hell 2, Back into Hell by Meatloaf. Again, another example of a sequel that I think is better than the original. Much like with Tubular Bells, I prefer the sequel. Just like with Bat Out of Hell, I prefer the sequel. I think it was bigger, better, bolder, more adventurous, more over the top, more... you know, there was just so much theatricality to it. I mean, Jim Steinman has always had a flair for the theatrical, and that really comes across in how well Meatloaf delivers these songs. But Bat Out of Hell 2 was another level, man. I mean, come on. When you start off with I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that, and it never really drops off after that. You know, I mean, yeah, okay, there are some of the softer songs like Lost Boys and Golden Girls and Good Girls Go to Heaven, Bad Girls Go Everywhere. But then you've got the incredibly maximalist songs like Everything Louder Than Everything Else, Life is a Lemon, and I Want My Money Back. And I've always firmly maintained that if we can recite the entirety of the Wasted Youth monologue, we're going to get along just fine and be best friends. So, you know, that's a metric right there. And it's all on here. One of my most played albums of all time. I know every single second of every single beat of every single measure on this album, and I love it. In fact, I think I would say, if I can only take one album onto the desert island, then this would be it. And finally, I get one more. And he's here. You've probably been waiting for me to talk about him. But it's my boy. It's Elton. Of course it's Elton. It's always going to be Elton. Of course he was always going to come on the desert island with me. Whatever, you know. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. One of the greatest albums of all time. Don't even try and debate me on that. It's absolutely astonishing. And I've got this wonderful original pressing with the trifold. So you got all the stuff here. All the lyrics with inside. All the artwork. Everything here is so, so good. Like, I can't even... articulate how complete of an album this was. This was the man's life work put into a single album. If you were going to listen to anything by Elton John, anything which gives you a measure as to what kind of a person he is, what kind of a musician he is, what kind of a songwriter and lyricist Bernie was, you need to get on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. It is phenomenal. One of the most incredible recordings ever made. Every single track hits. There is not a single thing here that misses. You've got some of the biggest songs of his career on here. Obviously, like Candle in the Wind, Benny and the Jet, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, of course. But then you've got a lot more of these sort of lesser known tracks. But unlike a lot of albums from that era where only the singles really were actually, of any worth, everything on here is incredible, All the Girls Love Alice is great. Roy Rogers is great. I've Seen That Movie Too is great. Everything is great. There's so much music packed onto this. It's nearly 80 minutes long, I think. It's a long boy album. And it absolutely has to come with me. Again, I think it would be a fight between Bad Out of Hell 2 and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road for the only singular album that I could take with me. But I think if I'm stranded on a desert island and I can only listen to one kind of music, I want something ridiculous that I can blast at 8,000 decibels, so that's probably why I'd take Bad Out of Hell 2 instead of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. But hey, there we go. I've broken my own rules a teeny tiny bit by including 2 albums in one spot, but I don't care. This is my video. I can break my own rules. You can't stop me. So yeah, that is what I would call my own personal desert island discs. I can imagine a lot of you have got very different ideas as to what they would take onto a desert island with them. So, please do let me know what yours are. What are your desert island discs? I'd love to hear about it in the comments down below. If you did watch as far as this, guys, thank you so very, very much for watching. I really do appreciate everything. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.